Five Americans freed from Iran made an emotional return to the United States on Tuesday, ending their imprisonment nightmare a day after they were swapped for five Iranians held in the US and the unfreezing of $6 billion in Iranian funds. Coming off the plane, the returning Americans were embraced by family and friends with smiles, laughs, and visible emotion. Video footage from the airport showed. The welcome ceremony followed a carefully choreographed exchange agreed after months of Qatar-mediated talks that was triggered on Monday when the funds that had been blocked in South Korea were wired via Switzerland to banks in Doha.
How are you faring? Welcome home.
After the transfer was confirmed, the five US prisoners plus two relatives took off on a Qatari plane from Tehran. At the same time as two of the five Iranian detainees landed in Doha on their way home, three Iranians choose not to go to Iran.
We're home. Took a while.
you, my dear. How was the flight?
Good. All was good. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. It's too long. 5.5 years.
What an adventure, Amadi.
Yeah.
Yes, adventure.
Thank you.
One of the returnees briefly waved a small stars and strips handed to him.
Sorry to trip you up.
The nightmare is finally over, said Babak Namazi, speaking with his arms around his returning brother Siamak at Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Yeah, amazing. It's amazing. Unfreaking believable. We're so grateful to be together after 8 years. It's unbelievable. Almost 8 years to the day. It's unbelievable. We're so grateful. It's just, you feel like it's a dream. The nightmare is finally over. I've dreamt about this moment, and each time I've woken up and just been in this belief, like, why am I dreaming these dreams and not happening? And today and tonight it happened. So thank you everyone for your support. It's just been a very, very rough 8 years, but it's amazing to be together. Thank you everyone.
And I have to thank you.
For all you did for me.
The real hero of this story, surviving 8 years of brutal treatment, but never losing hope, and showing what happens when you're hopeful, when you fight. Why am I saying this? Yeah, it's over. I'm done. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We haven't had this moment in over 8 years. It really is. I'm not going to use explicits. It's just unbelievable. It's surreal. And we take it for granted having a family together. We've been apart for 8 years, and finally we're together. And it's just completely unbelievable. And we're grateful for this moment, really. And we're going to start building our lives again. Huh? Yeah.
Thank you.
How was the flight over?
No, I really prefer not to speak at this point.
Yeah, thank you guys.
The deal removes a point of friction between the United States, which brands Tehran as sponsor of terrorism, and Iran, which calls Washington the Great Satan. But it is unclear whether it will bring the two adversaries, which have been at odds for 40 years, closer on any other issues, such as Iran's nuclear program and its backing for regional militants, or the US military presence in the Gulf and US sanctions.
Short and sweet.
This is what it's all about, right?
It is.
Yeah, well done.
Day 2 of my job, this guy right here.
I was like,
Yeah, he was on me like a... You guys followed.
The freed Americans include US-Iranian dual citizen Siamak Namazi, 51, and Imad Sharki, 59, both businessmen, and Murad Tahbaz, 67, an environmentalist who also holds British nationality. Two of them have not been publicly identified. US President Joe Biden welcomed the return of the prisoners home in a statement on Monday, but his administration also announced fresh US sanctions. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, who was in New York for the annual UN General Assembly, called the swap a humanitarian action. Biden, a Democrat, had faced criticism from Republicans over the deal. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul, a prominent Republican, said the transfer of the $6 billion could encourage Iran to detain more US citizens. Biden aides say the money belongs to Iran and is being transferred from restricted South Korean accounts to restricted accounts in Qatar, which will monitor the cash to ensure it is spent on humanitarian goods, not items under US sanctions.
If Iran tries to divert the funds, we'll take action and we'll lock them up again. I also want to be clear. This is not a payment of any kind. It's not ransom. These aren't US taxpayer dollars. And we haven't lifted a single one of our sanctions on Iran. Iran will be getting no sanctions relief. When we're trying to bring Americans home, we often aren't dealing on a level playing field. We have to use the leverage we have to bring them home. They aren't going to be released for nothing in exchange. But I don't think we should lose sight of the bottom line here, and that's that we're working to free these innocent Americans who did nothing wrong, had no reason to be detained, bring them home to their families, bring them home whole and safe again. That's the goal. With that, take some questions. These bad actors don't need incentives, and this isn't gonna change the calculus necessarily of what they've been doing. What it is going to do is get our Americans home, and that's what we're focused on. But for clarity, this is the deal that we were able to strike to secure the release of 5 Americans. It would be great, wonderful, if we could just pick up the phone and call the mullahs and say, hey, we want our Americans back, send them back on the next plane. But you and I both know that's not going to happen, particularly with Iran. And getting Americans home requires decisions, sometimes really tough decisions. It requires compromise. It requires negotiations. It requires negotiations with people you really would rather not be sitting across the table from, but you got to do it. Because Americans overseas in trouble, wrongfully detained, need to know, and their families need to know, that this president and this administration will do what it takes to bring them home. We're comfortable in the parameters of this deal. I've heard the critics, that somehow they're getting the better end of it. Ask the families of those 5 Americans who's getting the better end of it, and I think you'd get a different answer. We're comfortable with the parameters of this deal. We're comfortable that there'll be enough restrictions, quite frankly, very rigid restrictions, on the Iranians' ability to use this money. And we make no apologies for the fact that we're going to get these 5 Americans home just as soon as possible. And we will have oversight, sufficient oversight, into the request itself to validate the request, and then to deliver funds appropriate to that request. The money will then go to qualified vendors to purchase and deliver the food, the medical supplies into Iran. So it will go directly to aid organizations or appropriate relevant organizations inside Iran so that the Iranian people can benefit from it. And that's an important point too. While we certainly have issues with the regime, we don't have issues with the Iranian people. And this funding will be important to helping them get over some tough times. No sanctions relief involved in this at all. We will continue to hold them and put them under that pressure. And now look, the President has said many, many times, we're not going to allow Iran to ever achieve a nuclear weapons capability. We would have preferred to deal with that through diplomacy. Unfortunately, the previous administration decided to tear up a deal that had actually set their ambitions back by many, many months. And now they've been allowed to continue to re-enrich. nothing we can do about that. We wanted to solve it through diplomacy. We are not able, and we're not focused on returning to the JCPOA at this time. That said, we will make sure we have the appropriate capabilities in the region to defend ourselves and our national security interests if it comes to that.
We gotta keep going. Go ahead.
Relations between the United States and Iran have been especially bitter since 2018 when the US President Donald Trump pulled out of a deal aimed at curbing Tehran's nuclear ambitions and toughened US sanctions. Washington suspects Iran's nuclear program may be aimed at developing nuclear arms, a charge Iran denies. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken left the door open to nuclear diplomacy but suggested nothing was imminent. US analysts were skeptical about prospects for progress, particularly with the US election looming in 2024.